All right, I want to do a quick summary because when you combine several events together of Jesus's life, like the power and the goodness is just multiplied, and you'll find that you actually have a capacity to worship him and enjoy him and be delighted by him. And you'll find as you practice this day in and day out, and hopefully you have some set times to help you just be regular in that, your capacity to worship him will actually increase. And that's been one of the greatest things in my life, to battle discouragement or depression or anxiety, because there's some great times in life and there's some horrible times of suffering that we go through. But to be able to worship Jesus in the good times, the horrible times, and everything in the middle, it just gives me breath to breathe in what can sometimes be a crazy life. So, day 1, 2, and 3. Day number 1, we looked at the disciples. Jesus talks about this parable of the four soils, and they come and say, hey, we don't get it. What does that parable mean? And Jesus doesn't find fault with them for being confused. He basically just patiently instructs them. Patient instruction, it's a beautiful thing when you start to consider it. He doesn't get upset with them like a Pharisee might get upset, like, haven't you figured this out yet? He breaks it down for him, says, all right, guys, the parable of the four soils is this, and he starts to explain it. And so we can just enjoy when we're confused about things. We can ask God, we can ask Jesus for help, and he longs to explain things to us. And, it might take a few minutes, few hours, days, weeks, months. Some things, take longer. But he's going to engage with us and explain things. And it's just good to know that. Day 2, we looked at the disciples having a real argument about who's the greatest. And again, we see this in the business world. We see people fighting to be the CEO, CFO, or the boss. We see it in the political world. If you want to look at history in the Middle Ages and just the conniving and the fighting for power, who gets to be king or duke or lord, it's just in human nature everywhere, and the disciples are wrestling with it as well in the church because nobody's perfect. And Jesus's response to them is so awesome. Instead of, again, tearing them down, instead of fault finding them, he confronts their sin. He doesn't, go passive on it and turn a blind eye, and he instructs them. He doesn't shame them. He doesn't reject them. He says, let me tell you how to be really great, because I want you to be great. And he builds them up, and he does it in just an awesome way. And then day 3, we looked at him really enjoying the disciples. Really enjoying the children. And in day 3, part 2, we also looked at Jesus, getting after the disciples and saying, look, I never want to see you getting in the way of the children between me and them. I came for the children. I came for the adults. I came for everybody. I want people with me. I want everyone with me. And he's passionate about that. And his passion comes out in his intensity to rebuke the disciples for trying to run off the children. And presumably they did that because they thought he was too busy. And Jesus is like, I'm never too busy for anyone. I'm never too busy for the children, even if we think they're not the most important in that day and age. And he says they're incredibly important to me. And so then he's got some correction for the disciples, but without rejection. And so when you put these 3 days together, he's willing to teach us when we're confused. He will, challenge us on our sins, but in a way that builds us up. He's not going to condemn us and shame us and push us away. And then with disciples and children, he just loves the children, and he'll correct the disciples, but without rejection. So you put all that together. If you've seen Jesus, you've seen the Father. Oh man, it gives you a great picture of God. And understanding God's character could really go a long way, keeping people out of cults and controlling religions or religious kind of situations that it's just like anything goes, you do what you want to yourself or anybody else. Being grounded in his character is just a place not only of safety and protection, But man, as your worship life develops, of just joy, and it's awesome. So if you've seen Jesus in all these ways, that tells you the Father enjoys the children, is willing to teach us, you know, uh, instructs us when we're in sin, and might correct us, but without rejection. And uh, and so worship around that. Convert those into worship statements in your prayer time. All right, day 1 through 3, just pulling it all together.